To everybody who is not participating in tonight's lecture, we have, alhamdulillah, a very nice lounge area, so feel free to go, relax, enjoy some tea, inshallah ta'ala, have lovely, lengthy discussions to your heart's content. Barakallahu feekum. As for the rest of us, today, inshallah ta'ala, we are talking about the third evidence in Islam. So we talk about evidence in Islam, and the four main ones that everybody's aware of are, what were the first two that we covered? Quran and Sunnah seems very straightforward, and then third one being Ijma, and the last one is being what? Qiyas. So these are the four main ones, and then we're going to go into all the other different types after that, inshallah ta'ala. But today we're going to really dive deeper into Qiyas bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So bismillah. As for the definition, every time you take a look at anything, studying anything in Islam, and it says, it's always going to be lughatan and istilahan, like linguistically and technically. So let's take a look. Linguistically, ajma'a yujmi'u ijma'an means what? To concur, to collectively agree, or to have firm resolve. That's what it means in a just purely language perspective. Then technically, istilahan, it means what? Consensus, ijma' yani, on an Islamic, on a point of Islamic law. So it has to do with fiqh specifically. And you'll see why I put that in blue in a second, that has been reached by all, and I put that in purple, has been reached by all the Muslim scholars in any generation after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. So this is a istilahi, or you could say a technical definition. It's consensus on a point of Islamic law that has been reached by all the Muslim scholars in any generation after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. So why is this the definition? For a number of reasons. On a point of Islamic law, because matters of language or logic or history wouldn't count as ijma' from an usuli perspective. We're only talking about fiqh. That seems to be, I hope that's clear. All, meaning not just the people of Mecca. Sometimes you'll hear, oh, this is ijma' min ahl Medina. This is ijma' from the people of Medina, or the khulafa, or the people of Mecca, or whatever the case is. And no, we're talking about ijma' from all the Muslim, as in non-Muslims, their consensus doesn't make a difference. We're not considering that from a fiqh perspective. And scholars, the laymen don't matter as well. Oh, I don't believe that. Yes, I'm a Muslim, but I disagree with that. Nobody cares about your opinion. We're only looking at major scholars. And then after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, this is an interesting point. Why? Because during the life of the Prophet ﷺ, his opinion would supersede any consensus regardless of the size. Now, this never really happened, but even theoretically, this wouldn't happen. I mean, obviously, the Sahaba wouldn't all go against the Prophet ﷺ because he's the Prophet. They obviously submit, they're Muslims. But if theoretically it happened, it wouldn't make a difference because you don't consider ijma'. Like, oh, what does the body of Muslims think about, during the time of the Prophet ﷺ? Who cares? If the Prophet ﷺ said something, that's it. So I hope everybody understands that ijma' is only considered as a viable question to be answered after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. Now we go to that source of evidence, because obviously Quran and Sunnah is first. Okay, let's keep going. What are the pillar? There's a particular pillar, and then there are 6 conditions. So what are they? As for the pillar, it has to be consensus of the scholars. Seems pretty straightforward. So that's what it is. But what are its conditions? Ashurut, there must be a large number. Meaning that if theoretically, and I don't think this ever took place, but if theoretically at one point in time, there could have only been 1 or 2 great scholars living in a certain time period. So you can imagine theoretically that the ummah only has, let's say, 1 or 2 great ulama, right? And therefore, their agreed upon opinions wouldn't be considered ijma' because 1 or 2 is simply not enough. Now, I don't think this ever happened, but still, the point is just to make it clear that ijma' has to be a large number. Point number 2 is what? That the consensus must be 100% to be considered ijma'. Even if just 1 or 2 or just a few scholarly detractors they have a different opinion, then this would spoil the ijma'. Ijma' is considered completely agreed upon. And the consensus can't be restricted to a region, country, or school of thought. We talked about this earlier. And the consensus must be known through the explicit expression from each scholar, be it through word or deed, or stated individually or collectively. And we're going to explain what that means in a moment, inshallah. What do you mean collectively? So we'll see that in a moment, inshallah. Furthermore, the scholars must be people of ijtihad, upright in character, and far away from any kind of bid'ah. And the opinions of each of these scholars must be transmitted reliably through authentic chain of narration. So that's what are the conditions of ijma'. So, what do scholars agree upon? This is the big question. And this could be regarding any fiqh issue. Let's say, for example, there's an ayah of the Quran. Do they have ijma' on how this ayah is understood? It could be a certain ayah of the Quran. It could be a particular hadith. It could be a point of qiyas. Or upon a ruling that's derived from a legal maxim, يعني a qaida fiqhiyya. It could be any one of these type of fiqh issues, as long as everybody agrees, therefore it is considered qiyas. Or agreeing on a point about the use of an evidence in Islam, like all the ones that we're going to study later. I know you're not familiar with these terms yet, but we will learn in future classes. What is istihsan, istishab, urf, sadd al-dhara'i', and the like, inshallah ta'ala. Now, what's interesting about this is that whatever the proof is, whether it be from a qat'i source. Remember what we talked about qat'i before? Qat'i means like there's no question about it, like for example the Quran. Or dhanni. Dhanni is like there's some suspicion in it. Like for example, a matter of qiyas. It's an analogy. Does the analogy fit? Does it not fit? This is dhanni. There's suspicion about it. However, the fact of the matter is that if all the scholars agree upon it, it gets elevated from a dhanni position to a qat'i one. So what do I mean by that? Let's give an analogy so everybody can follow along. Okay, I'll just give an analogy that I think is from my own mind, so don't take it too seriously, but I don't think I'm guessing too much. I think this is pretty much a safe analogy. We all know that khamr is haram because Allah says so very explicitly in the Quran, right? Allah Ta'ala describes khamr or alcohol, wine, etc. as something haram. Good. Now, what about cocaine? Well, there are no ahadith about cocaine, right? Because it didn't exist at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So then you're like, okay, so what do we know about this? So then you would say, well, I'm going to make qiyas, I'm going to do an analogy and say it seems that they're analogous because they both cover the mind. That's where khimar comes from. Khimar, it's the covering of the face, right? Khimar, because that's what alcohol does. It's khamr, it covers the mind. So since they both cover the mind, therefore, this is my qiyas, that just the same way alcohol is haram, therefore, it takes the same ruling, cocaine is haram. Now, I believe, and I'm pretty sure this is true, I'm pretty sure every single scholar agrees with this. If you go around the world and take all the major ulama of today or yesterday or tomorrow, whatever the case is, they're all going to say, I'd be very surprised to find out if I'm wrong about this. But anyway, let's just say from my opinion, my guess is, let's not take it too seriously, my guess is that there's ijma' on this issue. Therefore, it being a qiyas, making it dhanni or suspicious, is now set aside to the fact that, well, there's ijma' on this, therefore it is qat'i, it is absolute. It is something that is very clear-cut and explicit. Is everybody understanding that point? Because if there's ijma' about it, then it gets elevated from that perspective. Hope that's clear. Let's keep going. What ijma' depends upon. Even if ijma' is reached for a particular issue, it can be that the scholars of that time agreed upon a ruling based on their context. Hence, applying an old ijma' to new circumstances may be incorrect, even if the context isn't considered. So this is a very important point. Some new issue can come up, right? And someone could say, brother, it's clearly haram. And you're like, why is that the case? Ijma' about this issue. Brother, you're not taking context into account, right? If you are applying an old ruling for an old context and saying that we're just going to copy paste it because of ijma', well, it was ijma' in that context. So context does matter when taking fiqh into account. So that's what it depends upon. That's one thing. Now, ijma' contrasting the sunnah. This is where things get a little bit more interesting. How could ijma' contrast the sunnah? Why? It would be for the sake of a maslaha mursala. This is a term we're going to be studying more in detail in future classes, inshallah. A public interest, a maslaha mursala. So, for instance, after any conquest, what was the sunnah of the Prophet? The sunnah was to distribute the land to the Muslim soldiers. Pretty standard procedure. We're fighting with a certain enemy, we take over their land, khalas, that's our land now, it gets distributed as the spoils of war to the believers. Despite this sunnah, despite this being very obvious and clear, another method was implemented during the life of Umar radhiyallahu anhu. During his time, they conquered lots of land. So the scholars came to a consensus, there was ijma', that it would be better to leave that land on the hands of the people who already knew how to benefit from it. So you leave the farmers to do their business, whoever lived there, and then tax them in order to benefit the Muslims. So instead of us distributing every single soldier in all these different areas, the land was too much. There was too much land to cover. You couldn't give them all this land. It would be useless. They wouldn't know what to do with it. They wouldn't be able to have the workers to deal with it. This was ijma', agreed upon, although it had no precedence in the sunnah. However, it was considered a maslaha mursala. So you can see here that it seems that it was out of necessity and Allah knows best. And another example of ijma' contrasting the sunnah of a public interest is what? The Sahaba anhum coming to the consensus that the Quran should be compiled into a book. This was not at the time of the Prophet. They did not compile it into one single mushaf. They wrote it down on different parchments. People had different pieces of it. Yes, it was written down, but it did not get compiled into a book. Despite the fact that the Quran describes itself as what? ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ. It's described as a book. So it's interesting. So you could say that there's some sort of foreshadowing here, but there was never a sunnah of putting it into a book. This was something that was done during the life. This was something that wasn't done during the life of the Prophet ﷺ. However, because of the great general benefit, there was ijma' amongst the Sahaba. Everybody agreed that even though this is something new, it's something that must be done. Another example is the example of the adhan the second adhan during Jum'ah, during the time of Uthman ibn Affan anhu, not because he wanted to do something new, but because of the large groups of people that would attend. So the second was necessary to establish, to give them a warning to come earlier. This was something that was absolutely necessary, so they want to do a second one. So what ultimately you find the point is what? That the reason behind all these rulings was to continue upon the goodness that was experienced during the life of the Prophet ﷺ. So small adjustments are made to maintain the idea. And so one personal thought of mine is what? Personally, I think the ijma' that microphones, like right now I'm using, right? But this isn't considered as much, right? We would consider the question of, can I use a microphone for salah? That's a bigger question. So I think that the concept of ijma', the ijma' about using microphones and speakers are used to amplify the voice of the imams, could be seen in the same way. It's something that, look, this never existed, this was never considered, but it seems everybody seems to agree with it, therefore, khalas, we're just going to go with that. Why? It's to maintain the goodness. Why? The goodness of everybody being able to hear no matter how big the group is. What is the authority of ijma'? If the ijma' comes through tawatur narrations, it's considered qat'i. And if the ijma' comes through ahad narrations, or if it's a tacit or a silent consensus. This is a term that we can learn, inshallah. Al-ijma' as-sukuti. Uskut means be quiet, right? Sukuti means silent, right? So al-ijma' as-sukuti means a silent ijma'. What does that mean? It's not that everybody got up and said, this is a consensus, but rather they tacitly approved of it. I don't know, maybe an example would be something like, does every scholar need to get up and say 5 daily prayers is part of Islam? Do they really need to say that? I mean, the fact that they're praying 5 times a day, you know what I mean? It's through their example or etc., you can see very clearly that this is something agreed upon. And then it would be considered dhanni. There would be some suspicion about it. Most scholars agree that rejecting what is ijma' makes a person a disbeliever because it is something that is absolutely agreed upon by the ummah. Some say the exception is if the person is unaware of the ijma', then they may be excused for their ignorance. And this is always the case. I mean, in general, you always find that if you don't know something, then inshallah, may Allah forgive you for your ignorance. Let's keep going. Ijma' in the Quran. I love this story. This is when I was very, very young, I came across this story, and subhanAllah, it always stood out as one of the most beautiful stories in Islamic history. I don't know, something about it really touched me, and it's just beautiful. So, subhanAllah, an old man once came to Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah and asked him, what constitutes evidence in the religion of Allah? I want you to prove to me what you use for dalil. Imam al-Shafi'i says, the book of Allah, yani al-Quran, kitab Allah. The old man then asked, what else? He says, as-sunnah, the Prophet ﷺ sunnah. And then the old man asks, what else? And Imam Shafi'i says, yani al-ijma', the ijma' al-ummah, the consensus of the nation. But then the old man gets real tough on him. Oh, this is my interpretation, that he's kind of a tough guy. He says, where'd you get consensus of the ummah from? What's your evidence for that? Prove it to me. Imam Shafi'i pondered for a moment. He didn't have the answer. And I can imagine this old man being a little bit tough on him, saying, hey, young guy, don't be too quick, all right? I'll see you in 3 days. SubhanAllah, he tells him, you got 3 days. And so I'll give you 3 days and you better come up with an answer. So subhanAllah, it's just a beautiful moment where he's putting this pressure on him. So Imam al-Shafi'i went home and started reading and searching. And after 3 days, the old man came to him, he greeted him, said salam to him, and sat down. And Imam al-Shafi'i said, I read the Quran 3 times each day and night until Allah guided me to the words. Can you imagine? This is how, the reason why this is so beautiful is because there's this desire for clarity on one side, and then there's the need to get to the bottom of it. And in addition to that, there is a certainty that he's going to find it in the Quran. So he goes through the Quran again and again. And you can imagine, he just keeps going over the Quran. He's like, I have to get this. And finally comes to the ayah, وَمَنْ يُشَاقِقِ الرَّسُولِ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ الْهُدَى وَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى وَنَصْلِهِ جَهَنَّمَ وَسَاءَتْ مَصِيرًا. And whoever opposes the Messenger ﷺ after guidance has become clear to him and follows other than the way of the believers, we will give him what he has taken and drive him into hell, and evil it is as a destination. So Imam al-Shafi'i comments upon this and says, so whoever contradicts what is agreed upon by the scholars of Islam without authentic evidence, Allah will enter him into the fire. What an evil destination. The old man says, you've told the truth. Good job. You did it. SubhanAllah, I just thought this was so beautiful that he's going through the Quran and he's trying to find, and eventually Allah Ta'ala opens his heart and makes him see what was perhaps right in front of him. Obviously he had memorized this ayah, but he never thought of it from the perspective of what? Dalil, that this is evidence for ijma'. Another evidence additionally is what? Allah Ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم وإن تنازعتم في شيء فردوه إلى الله والرسول إن كنتم تؤمنون بالله واليوم الآخر ذلك خير وأحسن تأويلا. O you who have believed, obey Allah and obey the Messenger and those in authority amongst you. Usually, ulul amr is considered the political authorities, right? And then Allah says, and if you disagree over anything, refer it back to Allah and His Messenger. If you should indeed believe in Allah on the last day, that is the best way and best in result. However, the word ulul amr can also refer to who? The scholars. So it just means, the people in authority. Authority in what way? Usually it is understood as political authority, but it could be scholarly authority as well. And therefore Allah says, فَإِن تَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ. If there is differing amongst you, then return to Quran and Sunnah. Return to Allah and His Messenger. But then the question is, well, what if there isn't any disagreement? What if there is ijma'? Well then, of course, if there is ijma', then you have to what? You have to obey who? Ulul amri minkum. Right? You guys get the point? Allah is saying, Allah, as in the Quran, Al-Rasul, yani as-Sunnah, these are your primary, and then Ul Amri minkum, the scholars amongst you, the authorities amongst you. If there's disagreement, you go back to Quran and Sunnah. But what if there is no disagreement? That means there's ijma', therefore we take that, based on the Quran. You guys get the ayah? So subhanAllah, maybe we've been over this ayah many, many times, but we never saw it from that perspective. SubhanAllah, it's amazing how the fuqaha, they can open their eyes and see what's really there. Now, the evidence for ijma' from the Sunnah, alhamdulillah, there's lots of evidence in terms of the Sunnah as well. But it's so amazing that even though Imam al-Shafi'i could have said, I'll find one or two or three ahadith, he said, no. If something is as fundamental as ijma' is absolute evidence, then it must be in the Quran. That's why he was so obsessively went over the Quran, because he was certain it's got to be there. And that's one of the reasons I love that story so much. Anyway, the evidence for ijma' from the Sunnah reaches the level of at-tawatur al-ma'nawi. Can anybody define for me, what is at-tawatur al-ma'nawi? We talked about tawatur a little bit before. What is tawatur first and foremost? Please, somebody help me out. Yeah. No. Yeah, okay. What is tawatur? Yeah, ikhwan. Help me out. You're going to break my heart. What is tawatur? It means reports that have gone in so many narrations. This is why it's important when we start a class. Everybody's from the beginning to the end, inshallah ta'ala. It's kind of important. Tayyib, inshallah. So, tawatur means that you have so many corroborating reports that it's impossible to believe that it was made up. Even if none of us have been to, I gave the example a couple weeks ago, if none of us have been to Australia, does anybody disbelieve in Australia? No, because the idea that the whole world agreed upon a place called Australia and they're all just coordinating this lie is ridiculous, right? Even if you've never been there, you're like, no, obviously I believe all the maps and all the human beings that have been there, because the idea that we're all have this conspiracy that there's this place called Australia just doesn't exist, it's just all water. That's not very realistic, right? You guys get the point? So nobody questions, did World War II really happen or not? There's just too many corroborating reports, too many people witnessed it, too much history, too much video, too much etc. So there are certain things that are reported in such great number of people that it's ridiculous or impossible to believe that everybody agreed upon a lie. So when you have so many people narrating a particular hadith, it's a mutawatir hadith. All of the Quran is mutawatir. I want that to be clear. The entirety of the Quran is transmitted from so many chains, so many people memorized it from their scholar, from their scholar, from their scholar, from their scholar, all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ. It's impossible to think that it was made up. Okay? So the whole Quran is tawatur. And some ahadith are, and we talked about that in detail. Anyway, that was a bit of review. Tayyib. Now, that's mutawatir lafzi. Mutawatir in terms of wording. Every word of the Quran, there's tawatur. And certain hadith, in terms of the exact wording, mutawatir. However, there's mutawatir ma'nawi. Like for example, there may be many different hadith that mention that the Prophet ﷺ prayed and the wording of each hadith is different, right? One might mention, let's say Asr. One might mention the Prophet ﷺ was with us praying Fajr. One was mention, we were with the Prophet ﷺ praying Isha. Whatever the case is, right? But the fact that the Prophet ﷺ prayed, you get my point? It's impossible to say that, maybe it's all made up. How? There's just a gazillion reports. There's too many reports. So, ma'nawi, from a meaning perspective, they all converge together to agree upon the same concept. Ma'na means meaning, by the way. طيب. So if you take a look at all the different hadith, yadullahi ma'al jama'ah. Allah's hand is with the jama'ah. So this is one hadith. Another one, the Prophet says what? لا تزال طائفة من أمتي يقاتلون على الحق ظاهرين إلى يوم القيامة. إلى يوم القيامة. A group of people from my ummah will continue to fight in defense of the truth and remain triumphant until the day of judgment. So clearly, the idea that everybody's wrong can't be the case. So if everybody agrees, then that particular group also agrees, right? You guys get the point? If everybody agrees ijma' on an issue, then that ta'ifa mansura, that rightly guided group, they must be part of it, and therefore it must be true. Let's keep going. The Prophet says what? فَمَنْ أَرَادَ مِنْكُمْ بَحْبَحَةَ الْجَنَّةِ فَلْيَلْزَمْ الْجَمَاعَةَ فَإِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ مَعَ الْوَاحِدِ وَهُوَ مِنَ الْإِثْنَيْنِ أَبْعَدِ. Whoever among you wants to attain a spacious abode in paradise, let him adhere to the jama'ah, the main body of Muslims, for the shaitan is with the one who is alone, but he is further away from two. This is a part of a lengthier hadith in Muslim Imam Ahmed. I just took a small part of it. Now these are two da'if hadith, but still you find that the meaning is still there. Even though there's weakness in it, it still corroborates the report, which is, for example, one hadith is إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَجْمَعُ أُمَّتِي أو قال أمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم على ضلالة ويد الله مع الجماعة ومن شذ إلى النار. Indeed, Allah will not gather my ummah, or Muhammad's ummah, depending on the narration, upon deviation, and Allah's hand is over the jama'ah, and whoever deviates, he deviates to the fire. And another hadith is what? إِنَّ أُمَّتِي لَن تَجْتَمِعَ عَلَى ضَلَالَةٍ فَإِذَا رَأَيْتُمُ الْإِخْتِلَافِ رَأَيْتُمُ اخْتِلافًا فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِالسَّوَادِ الْأَعْظَمِ. Very interesting. My nation will not unite on misguidance, so if you see them differing, follow the great majority. Sawad, like this big group of people, follow the majority, play it safe. By the way, this is really great advice, subhanAllah. Every time you hear people saying, you know, brother, come to our halaqah. We have a special halaqah. We teach special knowledge. You know, this is something that only the, khawas, forget the awam and nas. This is for the khawas. This is for the special people. You know, I've been to places like this. I've seen these certain people that they try to sell you this, let's just call it, in my opinion, snake oil. They try to sell you something special. Oh, I have a secret. What are you talking about, secret knowledge? This isn't how this deen works. Brothers and sisters, when you know that the ummah is going through turmoil, there's division, we don't have a khilafah, the Prophet ﷺ is not with us, there's differences of opinion about matters, what's the safest thing to do? Stick to what is absolutely clear and known and obvious. I pray my salawat, I fast my Ramadan, I give da'wah, I call to the truth, I call to tawheed, I call myself a Muslim, right? That is the name that Allah Ta'ala gave us in the book of Allah. I try to memorize Quran, I try to pray at night, I try to fast extra, I try to give charity, I try to speak the truth, I try to speak up against injustice. Go, keep going. These are all, who can debate with this stuff, right? Someone says, no, but I got a shortcut. Yeah, you keep your shortcut to yourself, mashallah. I'm so happy for you and your shortcuts, and you think you're special. I'm sure you're wonderful. I want to stand on Yawm al-Qiyamah being safe. I want to play it safe. I call to Allah and His Messenger. I tell people, read the Quran and read what is authentic, stick to that, and inshallah ask Allah to forgive me and accept what I do because I stick to what is clear and obvious. Other than that, have a nice day. That's, I think, the safest thing you could do. Is someone going to tell you, no, brother, you're deviant because all you do is pray and fast and give charity and this and that, and therefore you're deviant? I've even heard people say stuff like that, who say, oh, people like this, they have no spirituality. And one brother, I remember, this was years ago, he responded so nicely. He said, how dare you? These people have no spirituality? Oh, these guys who are just stick to the book. These people get up in the middle of the night, pray to Allah Ta'ala, crying their eyes out. They have no spirituality because they don't do your special little groups and your special things. What are you talking about? How dare you say this? These people cry to Allah Ta'ala night after night, which is, by the way, ijma' when it comes to, tawatur ma'nawi, let's put it that way, when it comes to qiyamul layl and tahajjud and so forth, right? This is something very clear in the sunnah. So anyway, sorry for the long tangent here. So final few points, inshallah. What are the types of ijma'? Al-ijma' as-sarih, explicit when scholars agree with their words and deeds upon an opinion. Something sarih. So actually, earlier when I gave that example of the salah, that's through their deeds. So it actually is sarih, right? So maybe that was a bad analogy. Anyway, but whatever ijma' with words or deeds, this is sarih and obvious. However, al-ijma' as-sukuti, silent or tacit consensus, is when some scholars make their position clear on a matter and the others remain silent about it, right? They should speak up, right? من رأى منكم منكرا فليغيره بيده وإن لم تستطع وإن لم يستطع فبلسانه, right? You're supposed to speak up as a scholar, right? If you're a true scholar, you're supposed to speak up. If they don't speak up, then obviously there's no difference of opinion. Not offering a second opinion, thus it is understood that they don't oppose that opinion. This is where things get interesting. As you can imagine, this is where things get a little hairy. Al-ijma' as-sukuti. There are two main opinions about al-ijma' as-sukuti. I hope we can appreciate the brilliance of our scholars, alhamdulillah. The Malikiyya and the Shawafi'iyya, or the Shafi'iyya. What do they say? They say this isn't considered ijma', nor is it evidence. So they are a little bit tougher. They say, ijma' sukuti, I don't accept it. Why? Because because it is possible that the quiet scholars simply didn't have an opinion on the matter. It's not that they're agreeing, they just say, I don't have an opinion. So that's different than agreeing. Okay, very, very true. Or they may remain quiet because of fear of being attacked for their position. That's also very fair. They might be attacked for it, so they say, khalas, I'm going to stay quiet. I would say that nowadays we have examples of this. There are certain governments that are doing evil things, and some people say, what? Well, why, isn't this scholar speaking out? Well, he's not speaking for, right? That's very important to pay attention to. He's like, well, he's not speaking against his government, but he's also not speaking for his government. He's just saying, you know what? I'll teach the basic fiqh, how to pray and how to make wudu. I'll play it real safe. And look, man, you don't know. He's like, look, I got kids, I got family, so give the guy a break. SubhanAllah, you don't know what type of threats they're under. So that makes sense. So in terms of the Ahnaf or the Hanafis and the Hanabila or the Hanbalis, they say this is considered ijma', the ijma' sukuti. Why? And it's considered qat'i evidence as well. So they're a little bit more, they like ijma' sukuti more. Why? Because literal ijma' sarih, where every specialist gives his opinion on a matter, is almost impossible. This idea that everybody says, no, I'm going to voice my opinion, it's very hard to get that. Usually, the older scholars offer their opinion, it becomes popular, and then there's no real reason for the younger scholars to keep affirming it. That's a really smart point. That's brilliant. If you studied under your sheikh, and everybody knows what your sheikh said, and then do you really have to voice, by the way, I agree with yeah, we know, man. He's your scholar. You don't have to say, by the way, I confirm his opinion on A and B and C and D. It would get redundant after a while if you had to declare every last issue that you agree upon. So if there's no evidence of a threat, we shouldn't assume scholars would remain quiet on an issue if they disagree. So he's saying, so the Hanafis and the Hanbalis, they're saying, look, we do take it because we know when the governments oppress people for their opinions, and if there is no reason to believe that there is any sort of oppression from the government or whatever the case is, then why would you assume, right? Pretty fair opinion too. At the very least, it should be considered dhanni dulala. At least it should be, let's say, strong evidence, but you could see some room for disagreement, but by and large, it is considered strong evidence. Now, there are doubts about this. The Shia and the Mu'tazila say that ijma' isn't possible because having a consensus with all scholars means a number of things. It means all the scholars of a particular generation are known, and there's always a possibility that at least one scholar was unknown. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. Each one of their opinions they also means that each one of their opinions on a given matter is known, which is difficult to ascertain. Maybe you don't know their opinion. And of course, if the point in question is qat'i dalala, is something that is clear-cut and obvious, then there's only one meaning of this thing. There's only one of this particular verse or this particular hadith. So the ijma' isn't necessary anyway, so who cares? Conversely, if the point in question is dhanni dalala, as in there's multiple ways of interpreting it, then it's almost impossible that that particular verse or that particular hadith isn't interpreted in a different yet valid interpretation by at least one scholar. Like, in other words, if there's multiple ways of understanding it, then there must be some scholars that take the second or third opinion, right? So this is their rationality. So what do we respond to this? So in response to this doubt, we would say ijma' happened with the Sahaba regarding a number of things. So it did happen. So this is the response. For example, fighting those who refused to pay zakah during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. We saw that this was ijma'. People said, we're not going to pay zakah. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was the Khalifa. He says, we're going to fight you. All the Sahaba agreed. Ijma'. Done. Next, collecting the Quran and producing copies of it. This was something that everybody agreed with. Ijma'. So the impermissibility of pig fat as a qiyas on the prohibition of its meat. Someone might say, oh, the lahm khinzir is haram, therefore the, what's it called, duhun, right? The oil or the fat, whatever. This is halal. No, ijma' that it's haram. The permissibility of a Muslim woman marrying a non-Muslim man. Ijma' on this issue that it's the impermissibility, It's haram for a Muslim woman to marry a non-Muslim man. Impermissibility of one man having two wives, and those two women, one of them one woman is co-wife with her own aunt. Whether it's her khala or her amma, there's a hadith that says it's haram, and there's ijma', every scholar agreed that this is haram. And a mahr, this is an interesting one, a marriage without a determined mahr is still valid. Is still a valid marriage contract. So let's say, for example, two young people are excited, they want to get their aqd al-nikah done really quickly, so they're like, oh, I got the wali and we got the witnesses, khalas, we do the marriage, and then they, let's say a couple weeks go by, and they are living together, therefore their, jima' is taking place, they are, consummating the marriage. then the question is, oh, wait a second, we didn't pay the mahar. Oh my God, was this zina the whole time? A'udhu billah. So they get really nervous about this. And so the answer is no, it's still considered valid. It is still a marriage, but you have to give her a mahar. Like you have to, fix the issue. Now, what happens if they disagree? She's like, I want a big money. And the guy's like, no, I say this much. And they start disagreeing. One easy way of saying, just give mahr al-mithl. What's mahr al-mithl? It is the average, you take a look at her, let's say socioeconomics class, her sisters, her, cousins or whatever, and say, well, how much did the average get? A couple $1,000, khalas, there you go, make it easy, move on. So that's ijma' on that issue. The prohibition of the 6 different categories of interest. You can't make interest with dhahab or fidda or qamh or sha'ir or timr, whether it be gold, silver, wheat, barley, dates, or salt. Why? Because all of these can be used as currencies. Therefore, you can't give a certain amount and get more back because it's a currency. Same thing with money. I can't lend you $100 and say, give it back in 2 weeks, $110. That's riba. I hope everybody understands that's riba. That's haram, haram, haram. Good. And that's ijma' on that. And it doesn't matter if it's money or whether it's barley, dates, salt, etc. And as for knowing who the scholars are, this is done when conferences or gatherings are called by the governments to discuss a pertinent issue, plus the scholar of a particular city. Usually these scholars are known as through their teachers and also through their students. They don't hide away. This idea that the Shia and the Mu'tazila were saying, like, well, what if he's unknown? Right. So there's this great alim, mujtahid, top scholar, but he's just hidden in the, nobody knows him. Who is his teacher? Who are his students? Why is he hiding? What is he living like? This is not a very realistic situation. You have to live amongst the people, learn from the people, teach from the people. So, alhamdulillah, ulama are known. And then, of course, ijma' through action. The list of examples that we just mentioned are suffice, but if only one opinion on an ijtihadi matter is known, yet there weren't many scholars that commented on it, we can say that there is a ijma' sukuti or silent consensus, and therefore it would be dhanni or speculative or theoretical as opposed to qat'i. So even if there's only 1 or 2 scholars that have an opinion on a matter, and you're like, those are the only 2 opinions, you think, well, that's ijma', isn't it? Well, it will be dhanni. Why? Because the sukuti matter, the rest of them were all silent on it, so therefore it has less weight. So I know it's a bit of a technical issue. Barakallahu feekum for everybody attending, and inshallah we'll open up for comments and questions. May Allah Ta'ala guide us, may Allah Ta'ala give us strong principles of usul. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. So who would like to break the ice with the first comment or question?